Hello everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you. My name's Paddy Dillon and I'm the director of the Theatre Green Book. I wanted to start this morning by talking a little bit about how the Theatre Green Book was created. As I was listening to a little bit of what Hiroko was saying, which was being shared with me in translation, and I was thinking that where you are today in Japanese theatre is exactly the same as where we were in UK theatre 2 years ago. So 2 winters ago, just before COVID, I started bringing together some groups of theatre people in the UK to discuss theatre. I brought them together because I'm the chair of an international theatre conference, and I wanted to know what people in theatre were talking about. What were the real themes of importance in theatre? Everybody was talking about sustainability, but everybody knew that UK theatre had not done anything really to address the challenge of the climate crisis. So we all know how urgent the climate emergency is, and we all know that it will affect everything that we do, the way we travel, the way we live and eat, and the way we make theatre. Even though we all understood how important it was to do things differently, still, we weren't doing things differently. So I started to wonder, what is the problem? Why do we find it so hard to make theatre in a sustainable way? Shortly after that, the COVID pandemic crisis began, and all the theatres in the UK, in Japan, across the world closed, and we found ourselves in lockdown. COVID crisis was a tragedy for everyone across the world, and it was a tragedy for theatre as well. But there was one silver lining, one advantage. Suddenly, we had time to think and to talk, and we had Zoom as a tool to connect with people far away, and theatre people who were normally too busy to talk were suddenly available to have a conversation. So on Zoom, I brought together a group of theatre makers, people like yourselves, production managers, designers, all friends of mine, to answer a question. And the question was this: why is it so difficult? We all know there's a climate emergency. We all want to make theatre sustainably. So what should we do differently? Now, one of the people in the group, a technical director, said, it feels as if we're all waiting for something to be invented before we start to change. Now, I knew that actually sustainability is very simple. We need to use less energy and we need to use less resource. So I started to wonder, what are the blockers? What's preventing us from beginning to change? As we began to talk, we started to realize some really important things about making change, and they explain the Theatre Green Book and the way that we wrote it afterwards. The first is that when you start out trying to work sustainably, sustainability can seem very, very complicated. People said to me, so what's the most important thing? Is it the sets and scenery on stage? Is it the electricity used by my building? Is it the travel of the audience coming to the theatre? I don't know where to start. So we said, okay, if theatre is going to become sustainable, we need to divide this challenge into manageable sections. So we said there are three separate challenges. We need to make our productions more sustainably. We need to make theatre buildings sustainable, and we need to make theatre operations, the foyers, the offices, the workshops, travel, waste, all of those things, we need to make them sustainable as well. And those three subjects have become the 3 volumes of the Theatre Green Book: sustainable productions, sustainable buildings, sustainable operations. Today, I'm going to be talking about the first volume we produced, sustainable productions. How do we make theatre productions in a more sustainable way? Now, in those early discussions, there was another really important thing that we discovered very early. We had to come up with one set of standards, one set of guidance that everybody in UK theatre could follow. If every theatre wrote its own guide, set its own standards, had its own way of defining sustainability, then theatre as a whole would never move forward. But if we share guidance, if we all have the same standards, if we all talk about sustainability in the same way, then it will be much easier for theatre as a whole to become sustainable. And when a freelancer, a designer or a production manager moves from one theatre to another, from one production to another, they'll know that everyone they work with already understands the principles of sustainability. So the first thing we did was to reach out to all the organisations in UK theatre, the Theatres Trust, the Association of British Theatre Technicians, UK Theatre, the Federation of Scottish Theatres, all of the organisations in UK theatre. We brought them together and said, okay, we're going to provide guidance which everybody can follow. The next thing that we understood as we began to talk about how we could make theatre more sustainable was that what people really needed was not theory, but practical guidance. Theatre people are very, very busy. I'm sure that all of you in this room have too much work to do. When you're working on a production, you don't have time to research how to be sustainable. So we knew that in the Theatre Green Book, we needed to give clear, practical guidance for everybody. Now, the next thing that we realized was that, of course, theatre is very, very broad. It's a huge art form. If we wanted to make guidance that worked for everybody, it had to work for big opera and commercial productions, but also for small-scale productions as well. So we realized that we needed to set 3 standards. We would set an advanced standard, which would describe how to make a zero-carbon production. But we also needed a baseline standard, which anybody could use. Even if you're making really large and complex productions, you can still make it more sustainably by starting with the baseline standard. And between baseline and advanced, we set an intermediate standard as well. But it's the baseline standard that we spent most time on. Because the important challenge for sustainability in theatre is how we start. It's easy to imagine what sustainable theatre might look like in the future, but the real challenge is, how do we start? How do we make sure that every theatre has begun to work sustainably and is on a meaningful path towards zero carbon? Nobody can become completely sustainable straight away. everybody has to learn how, everybody has to begin, and it's beginning, it's making a start that's the really important thing for theatre. And so if you work to baseline standard, we need to know that anybody can do it, but also that it is meaningful. The Theatre Green Book is not about making us feel better. It's not about just using recycled coffee cups. So even baseline standard is a meaningful, a significant step towards sustainability.